Hello everyone, my name is Neka Asimobi, and today I'm going to be talking about the different types of Mendelian inheritance. Before we dive into the different types of Mendelian inheritance, let's talk about what Mendelian inheritance is. This is Gregor Mendel, an Austrian monk, also known as the father of modern genetics. And while studying pea plants in the monastery garden, he noticed that the flowers of his pea plants in the garden were purple most of the time, but every once in a while, they were white. Mendel selectively crossbred common pea plants and observed the traits that grew during each season. He studied 7 binary traits in true breeding plants: the flower color and position, seed color and shape, pod shape and color, and stem length. He carried out a series of single-factor crosses that led to the proposal of the law of segregation. This says that every individual possesses 2 alleles for any particular trait, and these alleles segregate randomly. He carried out a series of 2-factor crosses that led to the proposal of the law of independent assortment. This says that separate genes are passed independently from each other from parent to offspring. In other words, when you're given more than one allele for an individual, all possible outcomes can happen. Before we move on, here are a couple words to know. A genotype is the genetic makeup of an organism. For example, SS. A phenotype is the physical expression of a genetic trait. For example, smooth. A dominant allele is an allele that is phenotypically expressed over another allele. A recessive allele is an allele that is only expressed in the absence of a dominant allele. Homozygous is having 2 identical alleles for a particular gene. Heterozygous is having 2 different alleles for a particular gene. To determine the type of inheritance pattern that a gene follows, whether they are dominant, recessive, autosomal, or sex-linked, we use a pedigree. A pedigree is like a family tree. It can show information about an inherited trait passed on through generations. By analyzing a pedigree, we can determine genotypes, phenotypes, and predict how a trait will be passed down in the future. In a pedigree, the oldest generation is at the top, and the most recent generation at the bottom. Vertical lines connect each succeeding generation. A male is depicted as a square and a female as a circle. The parents who produce the offspring are connected by a horizontal line, and a vertical line connects the parents to their offspring. A group of 2 or more offspring coming from a horizontal line represents siblings. Affected individuals are shaded. Unaffected individuals are unshaded. Carriers are half shaded when it's autosomal, or a dot when it's sex-linked. When the mode of inheritance is autosomal dominant, that particular trait appears equally in both sexes. Both sexes can transmit it to their offspring. It doesn't skip generations. Affected offspring must have an affected parent, and unaffected parents do not transmit the trait. When the mode of inheritance is autosomal recessive, that particular trait appears equally in both sexes. The trait tends to skip generations, and affected offspring are usually born to unaffected parents. When the mode of inheritance is X-linked dominant, both sexes are affected, but females are more often to be affected than males. It doesn't skip generations. Affected fathers will pass it on to all of their daughters, and affected sons must have an affected mother. When the mode of inheritance is X-linked recessive, more males are affected than females. It tends to skip generations. It cannot be passed from father to son, and all daughters of affected fathers are carriers. Last but not least, when the mode of inheritance is Y-linked, it does not skip generations. Only males are affected, and affected fathers will pass it on to all their sons. And here's a flowchart that will help you analyze pedigrees. And that concludes my presentation on the different types of Mendelian inheritance. I hope you all learned something and enjoyed it. Thank you.